Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this last meeting of the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny, the last one of this term of the Council, which we may not see others of you again, and we may see others of you again. It just depends. None of us know. So if we can get through quickly, any apologies for absence?
We've had apologies from Councillor Ed Foley.
Also apologies from Councillor Omar Bush.
Thank you.
And just so you know, the Councillor Nigel Benbow standing in for Councillor Bush.
Councillor Benbow, thank you for coming. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Thank you. Has everyone read and agree the minutes of the previous meeting? Russell? Can we make sure they're included?
That's noted, Chair. I'll amend.
Thank you very much. Right, so matters arising have come up as well. Right, agenda item 4, which is in a different pack, which is in starting at page 7. And that's the apprenticeships in Merton, which is a very interesting read. I'm sure you'll all agree. And we've all read the papers. And Keith, are you leading on this? Sorry? Oh, I beg your pardon. Yeah. Sorry, Peter Little. Oh, yes, I can. Your name's very small, Peter. I'm sorry. Hi. Yes, I can see your name now. Right, we have read it, but if there's anything you especially want to bring out, please.
Okay, so what would be helpful for you? Would you want me to take you through the slides or just talk over them and just call out a few salient points and wait for questions?
The thing is, we will have read them and gone through it.
Understood.
But it's if you've got anything especially you want to draw to our attention, and I'm sure that members have got several questions for you.
Okay, well, thank you for the invite and the opportunity to talk about this. So I think on a high level, I joined in September, Dheeraj joined in November, and there was some really good work going on, but we were relatively new to this, new to the council. And what we identified was that there was no dedicated resource anywhere in the council allocated to this. And so that's something we wanted to change. And we pulled together a strategy which was endorsed by CMT, and delighted to say as a result of that, we now have a coherent strategy. We have 3 dedicated positions approved, and indeed I am interviewing tomorrow for the overall apprenticeship lead position with some promising candidates there. We've got a dedicated resource in children's schools and families aimed specifically at helping young people, care leavers, NEET, send youngsters into apprenticeships. And we've been talking to all the relative DMTs, getting people excited about apprenticeships, and we started to see the tide turn already. So I'm really excited about the future and where we're going to take this. We were tracking sending back in the region of £41,000 a month in unspent apprenticeship levy. We're now down to £36,000 a month. The demographics of the workforce is an ageing workforce. We have more people aged over 60 than we do currently under 30. And whilst that shows we have a great deal of experience within the council, that experience will leave and retire at some point. And so we need to start planning ahead to what we're going to do about that. And apprenticeships is a really great route to get that in. And what we've seen is the age profile of those people coming through on apprenticeship programs are towards the lower end, which is where we want it to be. So you gave us the opportunity to respond to some early questions, and I would say some of the challenges that we've seen is a real lack of awareness around the council from both managers and from staff, a real daunting feeling about what the off-job element means. And so we've been on a communications campaign to reassure people. I'll put some information in the slides about myth busting we've gone through, and really show how people can learn on the job, embed that learning immediately, and train toward professional qualifications that are relevant to the job. So the performance and productivity in that area where they're working will improve in the short term, but also for the long term, and is great career progression opportunities, and it's a great attraction and retention tool for colleagues. So the future is looking promising. We're already making great inroads, and I'll pause there and open up for questions.
Thank you very much. I have to say I found it fascinating, and I think it's wonderful this is being done, because it's such a tragedy. It's been lost in our history, and it's a vital thing for so many of our young people. It's interesting how you say it's for a wider age group than just young people, so that's good. And I'm sure there are very many questions people have. So I will say initially, if people can start with 2 questions, and I don't know if Diraj, you're going to come in with the questions or want to come in later, but do let me know. So James, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't, so Mr. Little, thank you for this. I wasn't, Chair, I wasn't 100% certain whether Mr. Little is a council officer. Is that right?
Yes, I am. Forgive me, I should have introduced myself. I am head of organisational development.
No, you did. Perhaps I wasn't listening, so maybe I should be asking for forgiveness. But thank you, Mr. Little, and welcome to Merton. I think you said you were very new. Chair, this report, it doesn't have a front cover, which obviously I appreciate every now and then it might happen by accident, but it is really helpful. I don't know whether it came up in your pre-meeting, but it is really helpful. Well, maybe Councillor Draper had a front cover, but I didn't. Okay. No, a front cover in terms of officer comment and an introduction to the report and a summary and what we're meant to look at in particular. So the only other, before the positive ones, the only other negative comment I wanted to make is that some of these things have been announced a number of times before, and I have read them in reports before, and also I've been part of task groups that I thought had agreed some of these things years ago, well before Mr. Little joined. On the positive side, whilst it's disappointing that we were sending £41,000 every single month, if I've understood correctly, back to the government, I think, Mr. Little, are you saying that's now been reduced to £6,000?
36,000.
Oh, 30. Oh, I see. So it's not really much a reduction. Okay, well, that's still quite disappointing. In fact, you know, really, really very disappointing that that amount of money has to be sent back. What I would be grateful for is, are you able to give a little bit more information? And there are a couple of points in this report where it's talked about or hinted at, but are you able to say how, as an authority, we're building links with local businesses? Because I'd have thought the key to this, you do talk about a communication strategy in the report, but I'd have thought the key to this is building that relationship with local businesses and trying to match the skills they require in the future workforce with our young people and what interests them. And I'd have thought if we can make a success of that, but I appreciate it's a lot easier said than done, but if we can make a success of it, I'd have thought we can be quickly using most of that remaining £36,000, because there must be lots of businesses who would welcome the opportunity to have a young, enthusiastic and local person working with them. So well, it doesn't have to be young, but enthusiastic and local person, and quite often young, working with them. So if you could just give a bit more detail around that, I'd be really grateful. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for those comments, and thank you for the question. If I may just address the comment of the reduction from 41,000 to 36,000 and the disappointment in that. I would agree, it is disappointing. It was disappointing we were returning any money, which is why we've embarked on the strategic approach that we have. And I think what might be helpful for people to understand is how apprenticeships are made up, and actually a shift in £5,000 a month is a really good start. So how the levy is funded is we take the overall cost of the programme and divide it by the number of months of which that programme runs, and that comes to a small monthly figure, and that is deducted from our levy pot each month. So if I give an example of a level 5 coaching apprenticeship, it's 14 months, it's £5,000, so it's circa £357 a month that's deducted from the account. So, and that's actually quite inexpensive, but we have a lot of junior level apprenticeships, which actually equates to around £125 a month for a customer service apprentice, as an example. And so it takes quite a lot of apprenticeships before we start making a dent on the monthly figure that's returned. So, but we're not complacent. We're taking on board new resources. As I say, I'm hopeful to appoint one tomorrow, a dedicated resource, the aim of which is to improve the number of apprenticeships we have at all levels and reduce that number completely. So to come back to your specific question about relationship with local businesses, I heartily agree, and that's one of the steps I'll be encouraging the new person to be doing, as well as relationships with local schools, colleges, universities, not only to give some of the youngsters hope of where they can come and get a career via an apprenticeship route, but as you say, also working with local businesses for them. Now, one of the things we just created is an apprenticeship levy policy, and it's included in the deck, but this is a helpful question so we can explain the context around that. We are permitted to transfer up to 25% of our levy pot into local businesses who don't have their own apprenticeship levy. Ordinarily, we have to, so the remaining 75% we have to spend on our own staff, but we can transfer up to 25%. So that's where working with local businesses becomes critical. We can help fund their apprenticeship programs that otherwise they wouldn't be able to do, and that's definitely one of the things we'll be working on. We've laid out the terms of how we would like that policy to work, because we want to make sure that it's for businesses within Merton and residents of Merton, and they all have a strategic line of sight into what we're trying to achieve at the council, so helping social care aims, helping with care leavers and skill shortages where we need. So I hope that answers the questions. I really appreciate the question.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Thank you very much for that. And that is, I had read that, and I'd forgotten actually that I read it, but I had read that about the 25%. That's good news. I would just urge you to keep pushing on those relationships, because I think apprenticeships, as a layperson, apprenticeships I think are such a critical part of preparing young people for work, but also matching young people's skills with, or people's skills with the local requirements of businesses and organizations. So it is critical, and whilst it's not your fault, it's disappointing that some of these things are only being pushed now, when in fact previously we've been told that they will be pushed. But anyway, it's exciting and it's good news that they are now, and that 25% is particularly good news. So thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this update on the apprenticeships as well. I have a couple of questions. I mean, I appreciate that it's in its infancy right now, but I really do think, and you mentioned about and written, briefly about the apprenticeship policy. I think next steps for me is I would really like to see what the strategy and plan is, with clear information in terms of how many children are actually looking for apprenticeships, how many children we think should be, youth, because some of these people are adults as well. I'm not talking about, I didn't mean to say children, I do take that back, but how many people, so what's the cohort of people that we think could have an apprenticeship, and how many do we think are actually actively would want to look if those apprenticeships are available? I think that would be a key thing. So there we've got something which is an objective which is measurable as we go over time. And secondly, in the slides, it mentions that for the government Kickstart programme, the target was to get 33 young people into placements, and there's actually 40. How many children do we think should be in a Kickstart programme now? How many children are looking to be in a Kickstart programme? What are those objectives in terms of the things that we can actually see, you know, how much that cohort should be, you know, how many businesses are happy to be involved, and where any of those gaps are so they can be addressed?
Thank you for those questions. So in response to, I'll go in reverse order if I may. So for Kickstarts, that's a scheme that sadly is coming to its conclusion, and the deadline for taking on board any new Kickstarts is the 31st of March, and so Kickstarts have up to 6 months placements, and therefore by the end of September there will be no more Kickstarts within our business. However, you know, I am really proud of the fact that we have been able to offer a high number of young people opportunities to come into work and gain valuable skills and experience where otherwise they wouldn't have done. And so I think it's been a phenomenal opportunity, and let's see whether something else like that comes around again. But we certainly took advantage of it. We're currently sat at 51. We've had another one been able to appoint. With regards to how many people are looking for apprenticeship, so it's an interesting question, and the short answer is it's really difficult to tell how many people are looking. So if I can talk about what our plans are going forward, our aim is to spend all of our money, all of the apprenticeship levy, on apprenticeships, and that's not just to spend the money, but it's for what that spending that money will bring. It will bring a tremendous amount of improved skills and experience across the council at all levels, at all ages, and create greater career opportunities, greater succession planning. And if we look at the younger elements, so those people leaving education at all ages, then it's a great opportunity to get people in to grow around, to develop them and nurture them into future leaders here. So it's something we're really passionate about, and also being cognizant of our responsibility as corporate parents, you know, working really closely with Dheeraj and Keith and the teams. And as I said, we've got a dedicated resource that's now been approved within Dheeraj's world, where their sole responsibility will be looking about how we can improve the flow through of all young people through into apprenticeships. So you asked for a target. We don't have one yet. We're just creating that role at the moment. We then need to get that role evaluated, advertised, and get somebody in there. And then once we've got the overall lead position appointed after tomorrow, those two will work together, and we'll take all the information that we have and look at what is a reasonable opportunity. But let me reassure that, you know, the absence of a target currently does not impact on our enthusiasm and drive to create as many opportunities as possible.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I'm really pleased to read this, and I know, because I was working on it for a while I was in the cabinet, that there has been work done, but the greatest work that came out of it was working through the Economic Wellbeing Group, which was led, and probably still is being led, by Diana Stirk and Naomi Martin, and they were the ones that provided the links with the business community, and it was actually the business community was actually at that stage running our apprenticeship scheme rather more than the council was. I have two questions. First question, one of the difficulties I always found was that HR weren't actually helpful at all.
either through lack of staffing or through just lack of enthusiasm. I can never determine exactly which. But the other thing that I think probably is still the case, and I'd like to ask you questions about that, is that an awful lot of jobs, particularly in this within this authority, ask for degree qualifications rather than apprenticeship qualifications. And that's always worried me ever so slightly, just per se, because to get a degree you have to write essays, you have to be good at writing essays or solving mathematical problems and stuff like that, academic things, whereas of course apprenticeships deal with the real world. Are we in the future going to be moving away? Won't get rid of it altogether, obviously, but will we be moving away from the academic qualifications, degree qualifications, and towards apprenticeship qualifications, which I personally believe for many of our jobs are more needed?
Thank you. So I was just writing down so I don't forget to answer the key points of the question. So thank you for that. With respect to the first comment around HR not being helpful, potentially through lack of staffing or lack of enthusiasm, I'm delighted to report that both no longer exist. So I sit in HR, I represent HR, represent the council, and I can assure you of my dedication and enthusiasm around apprenticeships and achieving our goal of upskilling as many people as possible. And there'll be no greater day for me when we've spent all of that money and have to put a temporary hold while we await for future funds to enter into that pot. In terms of resource, we've got 3 dedicated resources now aimed solely at apprenticeships. So that tide has turned. Prior to today, we were sitting on approximately 0.1 of a person that was looking at apprenticeships. So therefore, the challenge has been immense. We are moving into 3 full-time resources with effect from tomorrow. With regards the degree qualification criteria, what I cannot do is speak for every single job that exists, because there might be some very specific criteria in some niche areas that do take qualification, that do need qualifications. Social work is a case in point. However, the apprenticeships mirror those qualifications. There's a number of levels that are aimed that match the academic level. So we offer degrees. We offer apprenticeship qualifications that have academic equivalents. If I take social work as an example, it's a level 6 degree level qualification that we offer. Indeed, we have staff embarking on that social work apprenticeship, which means that when they come to the end of that program, then they will have had first-hand real experience and get the social qualification as well, without having gone through university and study that degree. And that is the nature of apprenticeships, that they don't need to go to college or university to get those qualifications, but the equivalency is there.
Thank you, Russell.
Thank you. I'd like to drill down a bit to, if you turn to page 36, you've got a list of the current apprenticeships within schools, and it's split between current and pipeline. When it's got teaching assistant level 3, is that within a school, or are we training somebody to do that?
It is within the school, yes.
Right, and how much effort do the school have to put in, not included in this, in introducing the apprenticeship scheme? I mean, presumably the person has to be monitored and taught, really.
Yes. So thank you for the question. Should I answer that now, or are there other questions?
If you answer that, there's one more personal question after that.
Okay. So apprenticeships whether it be in schools or whether it be elsewhere, it does take a commitment from the individual embarking upon that apprenticeship programme, and it takes a commitment from the manager. But they're not alone, and we have training providers who give guidance and support, and they learn on the job and can apply that learning instantly. So the payback is huge. What I can tell you is we've got a really good, strong and growing relationship with our schools, and the appetite is growing, and we have people embarking on apprenticeships, as you can see, at all levels. Now, one of the people is an SBM at the school at Merton Park, who is undertaking a master's and apprenticeship, and she's a huge advocate. And as a result, got all the schools together, and I've been on calls with them to talk to them about the apprenticeship programs, overcome any myths or concerns that they have, and that's seen appetite increase. People really want to do this. They understand the commitment, they understand the payback, and they are really wanting to do it.
Ellie, did you still want to ask something?
I was coming more with an answer to some of their existing questions rather than a question that says, so as a cabinet member, I can't really ask questions here. Is that appropriate for me to do that now, Sally, or do you want me to wait until the end? So firstly, this is an area that I'm deeply passionately committed to, and I worked for a year at a youth employment charity. And one of the challenges I found then when working for a national charity is the problem with tackling youth employment is it doesn't sit in children and education. It sits across multiple different areas. So when I was actually first working on apprenticeships was not when I had this current children's role, but when I was, similarly to how Nick was talking about, when I was responsible for adult skills. And so it is, as you've been hearing from Peter, it does have to come from a collaboration between different departments of the council, economic regen, HR, adult skills, our department, and partnership with businesses and with government. So it is hard to tackle. And apprenticeships sounds, they sound so exciting, but they're not the answer to youth employment. And that comes through, I think, really clearly here. Because while Peter's being very, very enthusiastic about how you can overcome lots of the hurdles, there are lots of hurdles and restrictions on how the money can be used. So whilst I'm as disappointed as you that we have been sending that money back, we're not in a unique position either as a council or as a business for having been in that state. I've just quite easily found a stat just from last month that there was £111 million that was currently unspent across local authorities. And when you speak to individual businesses, you hear something similar. So the government's done some work to make it easier to kind of spend the money, but with COVID, actually, some of the new schemes they've put in place, like Kickstart, I think have in a way made apprenticeships look less attractive to kind of new entrants because they actually pay for the salary. With apprenticeships, it comes through very strongly in the paper. The money isn't used to pay for the salary. You have to pay that yourself. Whereas the Kickstart, you're able to get the money from the government towards the actual salary. So I think it's brilliant that we're doing more. This is definitely a kind of political priority for me and for us to do more. But I just wanted to provide a bit of context around the kind of challenges that we've had in the past.
Thank you for that contribution. Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. In a way, I agree with what Councillor Holmes has said about we've done this before more than once, and we were together on the committee that did it before. And I'm asked the same question now as I did then. Are you convinced that although I'm pleased that we're going to have all these opportunities for youngsters to learn trades, but back in the day and today, are you convinced, because I'm not, that we are actually not having any apprenticeships for people like me who get dirty for a living? We have a great call, or we will have a great call on infrastructure, but you have to have a team there to actually put it in place. And it doesn't strike me that we have gone from having very little of that. And as far as I can see from the lists, we still have very little flexibility for youngsters who want to learn to do jobs where you have to get your hands dirty.
Thank you, Peter. Did you or Diraj want to come in on that?
I can come in on that. Thank you for the question. And what I would say is there are restrictions on what we can and cannot do, and these are around apprenticeships that we can offer to our employees of the council, and then the infrastructure that sits within the council as a whole. We do have engineering type roles, and we will offer apprenticeships to that, and I'm working very closely with Chris Lee and his team on looking at a range of options to come in. With regard to previous question, we're now going to give up to 25% of our levy to those organisations who maybe can't take on their own apprenticeships or can't fund their own apprenticeships, where people will truly get their hands dirty as well. The list of apprenticeships that were kept within DEC are the current ones that we offer, but are by no means the ultimate list. So the Institute of Apprenticeships has had a stated aim to get close to 2,000 apprenticeships. We've got around 100 on our books at the moment, based on the need that we've identified. But what we are at pains to point out is that the list is not definitive. There are currently 645 apprenticeships on offer with the Institute of Apprenticeships. That is growing all the time. They've got another 45 due in development at the moment, with another 7 offerings on the table, and that list grows. And so what I'm saying to everybody is, tell us what the need is. Don't start with what's the current list. Tell us what your need is, and we can work with you. We'll either offer that today, and if we don't, we will go and source it and work with providers to be able to provide that apprenticeship offering for you. Because what we're focused on is what are the needs today and in the future, and how do we go about meeting some of those needs via this apprenticeship route. Got the money available to upskill people.
Thank you. Elizabeth, and then
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond, I think, in another way, I think, to your question, Dennis. Just thinking about, have we got the right qualifications for young people who, in your words, want to get their hands dirty? And, apprenticeships is one way of looking at it. I just wanted to mention that the government have introduced T-levels. And T-levels are ways of young people, for example, to get ahead in construction, in other sort of areas such as that. So for young people for whom there is a less academic route is appropriate, T-levels are one of the ways forward. And some of our schools are providing T-levels, and we're looking to sort of think about how we coordinate that across South West London, because not every school can or college can provide all T-levels.
thank you for that information. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. First thing I want to say, for this, and hopefully will come, helping young children finding employment. I'm not going to repeat everyone said here, but I would like to focus on the vulnerable or disabled people. And my question is how much work do you present? How much do you actually guide them into employment? Because the surface is 10 times harder
to find a long term, in employment. And the question is really is convincing the employer your skills and your strength, not just your body aid. And also there's hope from the government in terms of whatever is needed to help with work. And my questions, and I've got them here. If you place them for a 6 month period, what are the success rate? Staying on for a longer employment if they exceeded their expectations. And the one crucial factor I find is quite common. Disabled people in the workforce often feel left out, so it's crucial that there is two ways factor, because on question 2 on page 12 in your report, it is very one-sided. It's also you need to look for the employer because you're actually educating them, and also you're helping them become a better manager, knowing how to deal with certain people with certain skills. And also it is so crucial to have one-to-one weekly basis on terms of your work, how you're doing. But it is quite often, and it's always met with expectation. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, if you can answer that, please.
Sure. So thank you for that. What I would say is there's always more we can do, and we're really mindful around creating opportunities that are open to everybody, and we do need to do more. One of the if I think I heard you correctly talking about a 6-month opportunity. If we take anybody in on an apprenticeship, we're committed to those individuals and to see it through and offer all the help and support that we can do to help them achieve what they need to achieve to get through the apprenticeship. One of the challenges that we've had on a wider context is about getting people in is what we can offer as a council with the type of employment that we do. And we've had feedback from young people and care leavers and people from NEET and SEND that the jobs we offer, and therefore the available apprenticeships that might go with that, are just not appealing to them because they want to do other things that we as a council don't offer, which is where working with other organisations as well will become paramount to the success of this, so that we can leverage our levy and our ability and our relationships with training providers to offer a wider range of apprenticeships and opportunities to everybody, whether it be directly through us or now leveraging the apprenticeship levy transfer, that we can help support other organisations who can bring people on and make a wider range of apprenticeships attractive to other people that wouldn't otherwise exist. I don't know, Dheeraj, whether you've got anything that you wanted to add on that, but that's part of the remit of the new role that we'll be creating within children's schools and families. We'll be looking at a lot of these aspects.
Thank you, Peter. I don't have anything more specific to add. I think the point you raise about the posts that are going to support in ensuring that we're giving equal opportunities and actually focusing on some of these challenging areas where we want to push forward and drive forward and support children, young people, and young adults with varying levels of abilities and skills to take part in and get involved in apprenticeships of their choosing, but also ones that would give them better life opportunities. That's going to be the crux of everything that we will be doing over coming months with the new apprenticeship officers that we've appointed. So I think you've covered that point really well, Peter, for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith, you want to add something?
Thank you. So just on the issue of young people with disabilities coming into the workplace, it's not apprenticeships, but certainly, as Elizabeth just said about T-levels, there's lots of work in the borough to support young people with disabilities into employment. So we've had many years of success of Project Search in the borough, which is work done by Cricket Green with St George's Hospital. That model has been taken forward into another internship model, which was only delayed because of COVID, but there will be a second disability internship model developing in the borough. So that work has been very, very successful. It's not apprenticeships, it's about bringing young people into the workplace to work alongside other professionals and then go from that into employment. So it's definitely a route into employment that works very successfully. And as Peter said, some of those jobs are not necessarily available in the council. So although they might work at St George's, some of them then go on to get jobs at St George's. One of the main employers, I understand from Project Search, is the Shard. So many of those young people go on to other jobs where there are employers that are very disability friendly. We also have through, and there's a reference in here to the Towards Employment group, that project which came out of members' scrutiny before, Towards Employment project, does work very closely with local employers. And there are local employers that approach us and say they desperately want to work with young people with disabilities. Because they see those young people as particularly skilled at the work they want them to do. So there is definitely a focus on that. Where I think the focus in the future we're looking at to do is to make sure that our work across children's services in that area and adult services in that area is joined up. And I think that's work where we're now focusing on, because obviously these young people work through until they're 25 with us and then go into adult services. So we need to make sure that what we're doing in children's and adults is aligned.
Thank you for that input. That was very useful. If there aren't any more questions. Yes, James.
I wanted to follow up on what Keith's just said and what Dennis Pearce said earlier. I mean, there are three that I can think of. There are three task groups, which Dennis and Russell will remember, but we've done one on sixth forms, we've done one on career pathways, which I think Keith's just referred to, and then we did another one with you on helping young people who are vulnerable into work. I agree with what Councillor Benbow said about people who are vulnerable or who have disabilities. I just wonder, Chair, which was the focus of the task group that we did with Keith. I just wanted to share with your permission whether maybe we might minute that without revisiting the past, there is now a team in place, which is great news. There are three reports that I would urge them and request through you, Chair, that they do read and ensure that as far as possible they have been implemented, because they were reports that were adopted by the Cabinet and endorsed by the Cabinet. And maybe, Chair, obviously the electorate will decide who is here and who isn't, but maybe with your permission it could be minuted that in a year's time this panel may look again at this same subject, particularly in the context of those reports where a lot of work was done by members and officers, and we might prevail upon Mr. Little and his team to return and update us on the progress during the year, but also with reference to the work that Councillor Pearce and Keith Shipman have both referred to.
I agree with you that it is interesting, because I wasn't on any of those, and some work from before my time as a councillor, and it's tragic if it hasn't been built on. And I know I do hear from residents, they're concerned of the how apprenticeships have disappeared and they're not really aware of them coming back. And if these 3 task groups have worked on it, Stella, could we have it minuted that perhaps it could be presented to Peter Little and Diraj Chibber so they could look at it and see if there's anything there that they can take and embed in their work. There must be records of them somewhere that they're kept, and it is tragic if we waste the work, and many hours go into that with members of the scrutiny team as well, supporting them, Stella. So it could be looked in, and officers' work that has gone into it. So I think it's a very good point. And Dennis and Russell, thank you also for bringing it up. James, for tying it together.
Chair, I'm very grateful to you for championing the task groups. I wouldn't necessarily say that they've been wasted, because I don't know the answer to that. I wouldn't go as far as that. And Keith's given us an example tonight of something specific that's been implemented. Dennis and I both made the point that we recognise some of the pledges that were made here as pledges that have been made in the past. So I'm very grateful to you for championing these reports. I wouldn't necessarily go quite as far as you, but I certainly think I'm grateful that you support the idea of the team, Mr. Little and his team, looking at those 3 reports again and then coming back in a year's time, both on the progress they're making, but also with reference to those 3 reports. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I don't mean to say work's wasted, because one hopes it never is, but if it isn't fully utilised, then I think it's a great pity. So if we could do that, and if Peter and Diraj, you could take that away with you. They're not hugely detailed reports, but there's a lot of thought and community work gone into it.
I would really welcome.
Stella was on them too.
Yeah, there's always someone from Scrutiny there recording it, and Stella keeps excellent notes of everything that went on and produces a great report at the end of it, which, Stella, I am very grateful for all those that you have done. Thank you. Is that all right then? Is everyone happy with that? And Keith, you may want to come in along the line as well because of your experience. Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Peter and Diraj, thank you very much for coming. You're welcome to stay for the entire meeting, but I do understand if you have other things to do. So it's your call. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye. We move on to item agenda number 5, which is the COVID update, and Afia Kutan, I know you're there. Are you with us?
Hello, good evening.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yes,
Hi,
we
good
have
evening.
looked through your slides, so we don't need to be taken through them one by one, but if there's anything you particularly want to highlight or bring out, please do that. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone. Apologies from our Director of Public Health at Dagmar, who's not able to be here tonight, and I'm here in her place instead. My name is Afia Kutan. I'm Senior Public Health Principal, leading on the children and young people's work in the public health team. And I'm also a new member, or new officer in Merton Council. I joined in January. Before I just pick on some of the key points from the slide, I just wanted to touch on 2 points. One, to note that the situational awareness report, which forms this regular presentation, that today's slide set is going to be the last SAR situational awareness report, and that's because of the sort of national changes around COVID and how the local impact in terms of changing the frequency as well as the sort of the data flow. And also to touch on the sort of landscape around, I'm sure you may have heard about the sort of living safely with COVID. So we are in a transitionary period at the moment, and have been over the last few weeks, and supporting schools and earlier settings through that. And particularly from 1st of April, we'll see a number of changes. We know that symptomatic testing will stop for the vast majority of people. And the government guideline going forward is to live safely with COVID. And as part of that, we've been advised to think about COVID as sort of living with other respiratory illnesses such as flu. We are awaiting further government guidance on what that means and how we can better support school through the coming weeks. And so we're awaiting more guidance. Going back to the slides and just pulling some key headlines from there. So you would have seen that there's a general downward trend on the infection rates. However, although the infections rates have been low, we know that COVID is still out there, and that people are still getting hospitalized, linked to COVID, and very small number of people are also in sort of ventilation. So the numbers are declining, but it's still out there, and we therefore need to be cautious going forward. And move on to vaccination. So you might have seen that our vaccination figures compared to February when we last reported, there's been some small increase in number of people who have got vaccinated. However, there are certain groups where unvaccinated group rate are the highest. And the slides on the ethnic breakdown shows that people from African background, Caribbean background have the highest unvaccinated cohort, as well as younger people. We know young adults also have a sort of a more unvaccinated compared to older groups. So we have an exciting program that we will be rolling out, which is called the COVID Champion Program. This is a new program, is from new funding that's come from Department of Levelling Up for the amount of £485,000, which we will be delivering between April and July this year. And that program, at the heart of what that program is about, is going out and reaching into communities, working with community sector, faith groups, to be able to, to ensure that every person, wherever possible, can make that informed choice of getting vaccinated. Coming back to my main sort of earlier headline, we're around a lot of the national measures getting stopped. Vaccination is our main sort of defense against COVID. So the Vaccine Champion Program will have 3 arms. One is the continued community engagement, or strengthening the community engagement. The other arm is the on-street engagement, so seeking opportunistic ways of engaging with people, having that conversation. And the third element is to incorporate something called clinical contact. So we will have a clinical, a clinician with at our engagement sessions, so that when people have questions about, for example, safety, as well as other areas, that we have a clinician as part of our engagement team. The last point to note on vaccination is that the latest group to have been eligible for vaccination is the 5 to 11-year-olds. So in the new year, the 5 to 11-year-olds who are at high risk due to medical condition have been eligible. And there's some work that's gone for GP practices to who've contacted the families and have invited families, children aged between 5 to 11-year-olds to come forward and get vaccinated. The most recent group have been all 5 to 11-year-olds. And for them, the program is locally currently being developed, and the national sort of ask is that from beginning of April, that all 5 to 11-year-olds will have an offer to get vaccinated. And my final point is in terms of overview of schools and early year setting and how that looks like. So my key point here would be that outbreaks in schools, you may remember that at the beginning of the year, outbreak in earlier setting in schools was significantly high. That's calmed down quite a lot. After the February half term, the number of cases were very low. However, things have slightly picked up again. And we are keeping a close eye on that. And we're also reviewing our processes so that from 1st of April, we know that we're not going to have that data, robust data from schools anymore. So we will rely on more softer intelligence and more our collaborative channels that we have built with schools and earlier settings to be able to identify and support in terms of management of suspected outbreaks. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that and for the detailed presentation of the report and your input too. Are there any questions for Afia? Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Although I don't pretend to understand all this, in the media over the last couple of months, there has been a lot more talk about members of the public who have had COVID-19 and if you like, the infection's gone away, but there are weeks, if not months, of consequences for some people. Is that increasing, or are we just learning more about the fact that COVID can leave some vulnerable people with months of illness because of the infection they've had, even though the illness itself has gone away?
Thank you for the question. Can I come in?
Please.
Great, thank you. That's one point I missed from my presentation, so thank you for asking. So long COVID is a problem, and it's something that, again, we're in the sort of early days of understanding through research what that means. And one of the important reason we sort of advise for people to get vaccinated is that we've had latest evidence to show that people who are vaccinated tend to suffer much low from long COVID. And so, you know, we know the symptoms of long COVID in fatigue, feeling tiredness, not being able to, bounce back. And again, these are some of the issues that have been also flagged by our early years and school settings as well, in terms of staffing issues. And locally, and there's also been another sort of headline that actually I've come across today to show that the prevalence of long COVID is highest in adult social care staff and also teaching and education staff. So that's quite a new piece of information that I learned today. In terms of what's happening around that, my understanding is that as with the rest of the country, locally, more research is being done to understand, and work is being done to think through about how to offer support. And I know my colleague Barry Causer did a presentation at the Health and Wellbeing Board, I think last week, if not the week before, about long COVID. But there is work being done, but at the moment it is early stages. So I don't have much to say at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from anyone? Afia, we don't have any more questions. Can I say thank you very much for coming tonight and for giving the information to us and answering the question too. Thank you very much. We know we've got to learn to live with it. It's interesting to get the updates. Thank you. Sorry.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. We're going to, good night. Good night. Item agenda 6, which is the school standards update, and Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do a very brief introduction to this report, which is our annual report around school standards in Merton. So it's about the academic year 2021. Obviously a time of COVID, and so the actual performance information that we have available to report on is significantly reduced. We have phonics screening check data, we have Key Stage 4 post-16, and then attendance and exclusions. But there are other data which we would normally report, which is just not available because the assessments did not happen in the same way last year. The report is laid out with an executive summary at the beginning. We also then have the performance information that we are able to report on towards the beginning, and also then the priorities for the current academic year, which we are in the middle of at the moment. In general, performance where we do have that data available, we are above national averages in most indicators, with the exception around special schools, attendance, persistent absence and fixed term exclusions. Just to perhaps highlight some particular successes or the success of ongoing work in terms of our young people not in employment training, our NEET young people, top quintile performance again nationally. I would highlight the following as priorities for our schools. It is obvious to say that it is, shall we call it, post-pandemic recovery, and getting back to some semblance of normal around school improvement activity. I think we've reported on that in our in our departmental updates to this panel. We are not post-pandemic, and I'm just going to make a reference to to what Afia was just talking to us about. So even now, schools are reporting significant staff absence, and that staff absence is impacting on consistency of teachers and teaching assistants being in front of classes. We have children who attendance levels remain low, even if they are above national averages at the moment. But attendance for children has been patchy, and so they have been missing learning. So it is that focus on post-pandemic. That is our first priority. It is also around our SEND strategy going forwards, obviously linking in with the safety valve agreement with the DFE. It is the well-being of staff and pupils. So thinking about mental health at the in its spectrum, if you like, of how young workforce as well as staff pupils are supported. We have got the national white paper, the new white paper coming out from the government later this spring, early summer, and there are trailed to be several significant changes for the school system, which again, we're going to support schools to navigate that. And I would say attendance in general of pupils, again, as already reported to this committee, is a concern. So those are our focuses. Thank you, Chair, and obviously very happy to take questions.
Very much. Thank you, Jane. Are there anyone's questions? So Hayley, then James.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report as well, Elizabeth. It's really difficult, as we know, you know what I mean, and I think that particularly, I mean, we've been aware of being sat here. Some of us have got children in school, so we were, you know, some of us are school governors. We're aware of the overall situation. There's a couple of just key areas for me personally, which I know I've mentioned in times past. In the reports in section 3, and it mentions about the section 3.2, the proportion of schools judged to be good or better in Merton was maintained at 95% over the course of the academic year, and that this proportion continues to be above the London and national averages. Now, for me, that doesn't really paint the truest picture, and I mean, I'm somebody who works in finance. I do financial analysis, and I wouldn't be comfortable because essentially we're better by 1% than London overall. And I just don't think that it should be mentioned in the narrative because it's giving an unfair representation in my view. Because if you actually look at outstanding schools, then we're actually below the London average, but then we do better for the good. So what we've actually done in the report is add the good to the outstanding so that they're better by 1%. That, in my opinion, who does this as a day job isn't best practice. That's just one thing to say there. And also for me, when we do go back to more regular academic school years, and we don't know when that will be, you know, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. It's about in terms of, I mean, if we do actually add the two together, don't get me wrong, having so many schools which are good or outstanding, and we know the different, you know, to be able to get to good is very good, is to actually just, what is the council's view and plan to move more of those schools from good to outstanding, and of course the ones that require improvement into those brackets as well. But just what is the proposal and the plan to do that better? But I do understand right now within this academic year what the priorities are, but I'm just talking about in the future as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may respond. Thank you for the point around the representation around 95% good or better. Obviously, that is a national statistic that is oft quoted by Ofsted themselves. That is the headline statistic they go with. But I do take your point that our proportion of outstanding at 29% is 2% lower than the national. And it is something that we do, London, I beg your pardon, because we're well above national on that. And obviously for our secondary schools, proportion judged to be good or outstanding, is well above that. But the plan to move from good to outstanding in more normal times, it's going to come through our Merton Education Partner Programme. As you know, every school has a Merton Education Partner, and it will be their job, it is their job to challenge schools with that ambition that we all have, that as many schools are as outstanding as possible in the national context, which we've already discussed around Ofsted, the bar for outstanding being raised significantly under the current framework. There will be a job of work around making sure that all our schools understand what the outstanding criteria mean. And again, I think I've referenced before that the criteria for outstanding are less easy to decipher. And so through custom and practice of inspection, it's about taking our schools through. So this is what is being deemed to be outstanding in inspections that have happened recently. Sort of a wholesale piece of work there with all our schools, as well as that bespoke support. And part of that wholesale work will be bringing in HMIs to come and talk to our head teachers, to talk to them about their views on this as well. I hope that helps. Thanks.
Chair, thank you. So I notwithstanding Councillor Ormerod's comments, which I obviously agree with, although I hadn't spotted that myself, I did want to say that this is a really fantastic report, and I hope and congratulations to the Cabinet member who obviously is responsible when things don't go right. So it's only fair to give credit when they have, and to the officer team. I mean, it really is a fantastic report, and notwithstanding the fact that it's COVID times, page after page is showing good news and progress. So that's really excellent. And it's not the first time we've seen this. We are very lucky in this borough. We do seem to have good teachers, good head teachers, good officers, etc. And it is a really fantastic report. And also in particular, I mean, I've got small comments, but none of them negative, but in particular, the fact this report itself sets it out so clearly. I mean, there could be hours to talk about, but there isn't, because everything is set out so clearly, what the challenges are, what we're doing about the challenges, and what the outcome of that work has been. And I believe that Scrutiny is about holding the cabinet to account and holding yourselves as senior officers to account. The fact is, in any authority, there are challenges and things go wrong. I feel our role as councillors is to ask officers and cabinet members, do you know what the challenges are? Do you have a plan for dealing with them? And do you have a measure for that success? And clearly this report shows time and time again that the answer to all those questions is yes. So I really am very impressed with this. Until election time, then I'm not, of course. But no, it's really good. The small comments I wanted to make are that firstly, I was surprised to read that there were no increases in safeguarding concerns. I mean, that would be really good, but I thought that during COVID lockdown, we were really concerned about that. Secondly, I saw reference to a schools causing concern budget. I don't think I'd heard about that before, though I may have done. The third point I was going to make was actually made by Councillor Ormerod, and you've said before, as has the director, that the criteria for outstanding will change. So whilst as officers and even as councillors, we can accept that that's going to be really challenging, are you able to commit, and is the cabinet member able to commit that we will do our absolute best not to convey that feeling to schools, but in fact we'll be saying to schools that they have to continue to strive for that outstanding label. So Councillor Ormerod's question was, how are we going to do that? And you've done it. So my question is now slightly different. Will you and the cabinet member commit that we will do our absolute best to keep schools to that challenge? Thank you, Chair.
So with regards to the point about increases in safeguarding concerns, that's particularly with regards to the children who are electively home educated. And when we say safeguarding concerns, so young children and their families who are known to children's social care through a child in need plan or a child protection plan. I would also, so the numbers who have those plans was no increase last year. I would, like you, we were wanting to be very on the alert as to what might be the needs of our electively home educated children, because that cohort has itself significantly increased. So during this period, we have maintained our contact with families. And in fact, it would be fair to say that for some families, because we have been able to offer them remote visits, we have actually seen more of them, even if it is remote, but we're seeing more children, because previously those families might have chosen just to present us with a report. So absolutely alert to it, but the figures are as the figures are. And where we do have a safeguarding concern, in fact, our lead on elective home education is what's called an education navigator in our front door, in our children and families hub. So a really good understanding of safeguarding needs. Schools causing concern budget. This is a de-delegated amount from the DSG, from the Dedicated Schools Grant. It is purposed to support schools where there are concerns around standards, but also those schools that are experiencing deficit budgets in a context particularly of falling rolls. And where they are doing their absolute utmost to address that. So it's a budget, as I say, where we look at the schools in greatest need in terms of finance and standards and share that out to our schools. I'm sure Eleanor may wish to come in terms of the commitment to outstanding. I mean, as an officer, I would like to say there is absolute commitment to that outstanding. We keep saying it is going to be tricky, but we are, it is about approaching it in a realistic but ambitious way.
Clarify on that final, thank you very much for that. Just to clarify my final point, it wasn't necessarily a public declaration or commitment. It was more just, I understand that it's going to be very difficult. We've got a fantastic set of results here. I mean, all we can do as councillors, but particularly cabinet member and senior officers. All we can do is do our absolute best to make sure the schools that we convey to schools that they must be committed to continue that journey to excellent, to outstanding. Because although it's going to be tough, the alternative is everybody starts slipping back, and we don't want that. So it wasn't so much it was not so much a public commitment. It was more just, are you as officers committed to pushing the schools towards outstanding, even though it's challenging, and is the cabinet member committed to that journey? I more meant that rather than public. And Councillor Omrod, as cabinet member from May, is she committed? No, I mean, no, but it's just, it's so not so much public, more just, are we committed to continuing that? Thank you, Chair.
You wanted to add then, Dennis?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Holmes. And yes, this could be the last time that I am speaking to you as the cabinet member. Who knows? And I would say I'm absolutely proud of what we have achieved with our schools, and there is absolutely no complacency when I speak to the officers and when you speak to the head teachers about our improvement. Ofsted, on the other hand, have made a political, public commitment to reduce the number of outstanding schools. They have said that very clearly. And what I'm terrified of is our schools becoming a victim to that political ambition of theirs. Meanwhile, our political and professional ambition is to offer the very best education for all of our children all across Merton. Like, you can hold me to that. Thank you.
Can I just say I agree with that? I mean, it may also be my last meeting as well. But I agree with what you said. It is a shame that the ground has been changed. I think it is a shame. But privately, I mean, this is a public meeting, but privately we can agree that it's a shame and it's going to be challenging. But we still have to encourage the schools to do their absolute best to continue that journey to outstanding. That was the point. Thank you, Chair.
Just like to add to that, sorry, if you don't mind, Dennis, that there is also the worry when Ofsted have stated the goalposts have been moved. We obviously want all the schools to do the very best they can, but the more pressure you put on them, the more you're affecting their mental health. And there is also still the problem of keeping young teachers in teaching, because the stress and the way it dominates their life, they're perhaps not always prepared to accept. And they find after 5 years teaching, they're very skilled to enter a lot of other professions where they've got such a broad range of skills, they're very quickly snapped up. So I think we've also got to consider officers, but particularly head teachers, and the head teacher is vital in this, and the teachers working there, when some of them work the most amazingly lengthy hours to do the very best for all their pupils. So it's getting that balance right, Elizabeth, isn't it? You want to encourage and coach and help, but not trying to create the impossible where teachers are put under so much stress that they snap and they can't cope. Yes, we want the best. My children were educated in Merton completely, and we want the very best for your children. And you're right with that, you and Haley are quite right. But I think you must balance it with thinking about the staff as well and how they can manage.
Chair, I think my point, I agree with you. I definitely agree that there needs to be a balance. We need to be supportive of all the officers, but I think you were particularly referring to the teaching team in the borough, the large team in our schools. So I agree with you, but I do think, and I'm not saying you disagree, but I do think my point still stands, which is that part of, unfortunately, part of leadership, whether that's us as community councillors, whether it's the cabinet, whether it's the officer team, part of leadership is actually encouraging the schools in challenging circumstances. This particular one we're talking about tonight is the change in the Ofsted rules, but there are many other challenges. But in challenging circumstances, to encourage the schools to continue that journey and to give them that resource to do so where we can, to give them that support and encouragement. It was my asking whether the cabinet member and the officers are committed to that, and they've said they are, is you're absolutely right. We have to have that balance, but somebody somewhere has to say, but come on, we've still got to try to do this. And what I'm hearing tonight from the cabinet member and from officers is absolutely we will do that, and I think that's really important. What you're adding, which I also agree with, is that we have to do that in a supportive and encouraging way, and I agree with that too.
James, you've interpreted that perfectly. I agree. That's what we have to support, but bearing in mind, I'm sure in your profession too, there are pressures when sometimes someone snaps. I knew a head teacher who was there at his desk one day, the next day never appeared and never came back. He just snapped. He could not take any more. And that is a concern, because that leaves a school in a difficult position, although they'll all rally round. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I just think it's a balance. And I think we've got skilled directors and officers and a cabinet member who will manage that. So I'm just thinking we shouldn't forget it. That's all. Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're about to play Happy Families here, because I was more or less going to say the same thing about officers haven't done well. They've done exceptionally well to deal with these problems. But there are one or two things. James said about schools causing concern, but there's also what I'm thinking in it that says face-to-face or remotely or a bended offer. I'd like to know what that means. And also on page, 4 or 41 items, there are figures around the home educated, which is a 45% rise, a 30%. Now, I would just like to know, without having to research it, you need the base figures to know what 45% actually means. Rather than searching for it, could we have a, say, 45% could be 45% of 100 or 45% of 2,000. It's a different figure. You need it in more context. But as far as I'm concerned, as I say, I think the officers in the education sector have done this borough really proud especially over the last 2 years, what they've had to do, the resources they've had to do it with. And let's hope that can things only get better? There must be an election coming.
Thank you. Did you want to come in, Elizabeth?
Very briefly, if I may. So apologies, it's not bended. That was a typo. That should have been blended offer. I do apologise. That's a proofreading thing that I should have been across. But blended would be a mix of face-to-face and remote. The numbers of education, electively home education that rise, I'll hand over to Keith on that one.
Yeah, so on page 96, it shows you the number last year was 328 children were electively home educated in Merton. The year before it was 227. So it's a very, very significant rise. So nationally, there's been nationally a very large rise in elective home education. Obviously, a lot of children were electively home educated, and parents enjoyed that process and want to continue with it. So when children were at home during lockdown, some parents found that a very positive thing with their children and wanted to continue to do it. So that's been a national figure that's changed. The resources to support elective home education have also improved enormously with the resources that have been put out there during lockdown to help families do that. So that's another driver around it. We've also, though, got a driver around elective home education, which is where parents are concerned about their children being in school because of COVID. So that's definitely children that have been kept away from schools because they're worried about their children being infected in schools, and that's also driven up the numbers as well. So I think there's two major factors, but it's interesting that our figures are higher than elsewhere in the country, although there has been a national rise. The assumption is that the level may be even higher because there's legislation going through now which will potentially make a register of elective home educated children a compulsory thing. which there isn't at the moment. Families can choose to tell us and not tell us. Once it becomes a compulsory register, then the assumption nationally is it will go up again. And there'll be children out there that we're not aware of that are being electrically educated because they may have been always, say they've come out of the independent system, we don't know about them, or they've always been electrically educated and they've never registered with education. So that's always our fear and our worry. Those children are out there. The assumption is the numbers will go up again.
Nick.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thought I'd say something as probably the only person, councillor here, apart from Russell, who's absolutely certain of his fate after the next election. I just wanted to say, this is brilliant in that there, although there's obviously politics at a national level that kind of descend on Merton, and we have to work within the framework of those politics. That there's no politics in this at all. It used to be, we used to come into this chamber rather than certainly at council level, rather than specifically at scrutiny level, and we just used to sort of knock about saying how awful our schools were and how our schools were improving, and that was a big thing, and it was all down to the political parties. Well, of course it's not anymore. This is an extraordinarily good report. There's one thing that I would say, and it's taken back to page 107. You look at page 107 and you look at the people who are judged as the academies who are judged as outstanding. They're Harris academies. And you also see that St. Mark's is good. You start looking at the others, you've got Stanford and Benedict, who are either inadequate or requiring improvements, and only Beechholm and obviously Harris Primary, who've actually are either outstanding or good. Now, I've not done the maths. I left my calculator at home, but I'd say that does kind of skew our performance. And going back, it's got nothing to do with performance. It's got to do something to do with the kids at those schools. Now, obviously, those schools have opted to be outside of our system. But is there anything that we can do to actually help them to be as good as our own maintained schools? Thank you very much.
So in fact, we've only had one school which has actually chosen to become an academy. And that is Aragon Primary School. The other schools that have become academies, that has either been as a result historically of them becoming a subject of concern through Ofsted inspection, and an academisation was sought as a result. What I would say is that we have very good relationships with the multi-academy trusts, which oversee Stanford and Benedict, so our two academies which are not yet good or better. In fact, Stanford buys into our school improvement service, so their linked inspector comes from Merton. But when I say we have those good relationships, so we have that focus on those schools, if not in the same way, because we don't have the mandate to put schools causing concern groups around those academies, but we do scrutinise the work of the trusts to improve the outcomes in those schools, and as I said, good dialogue and a good understanding of the trajectory, and the trajectory of all three of those schools, not yet judged to be good, is looking strong, and we very much hope that they will be good the next time they are inspected. I mean, again, ambition, that is the ambition, 100%.
If there are no questions, I've got a couple. Oh, I beg your pardon, Joan. Yes.
Okay, and this is not a question, it's just, I'd just like to say, I've been a counsellor since 2014, and, I remember since then I've been on the Children and Young People Committee, and I remember those days when I just started, it used to be very challenging, up and down, we're not doing good, we're not doing that, but since then, I think we have made quite a lot of changes, and, I just want to say thanks to everyone, especially Keith, because where our youth centre is concerned, I know we have quite a lot of challenging time, and we really keep it going. And we have worked so hard together. Of course, we sit in this council, we ask some questions, we get answers, and we just need this to continue going. We work together as a team, not only to support ourselves, but to support our young people, because at the end of the day, we are a role model for them, and we want to do the best that they can achieve. And again, with the parents, we work together with parents, because without the parents, we wouldn't have good children in school. It's very hard, very difficult for officers themselves, because they do have children themselves and they do have a family to support. So I just want to say thank you all very much for all the support you give to our children and to us as counsellors, especially the young counsellors, like myself, who came in with possible small amount of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Sorry, Russell.
One very quick question. Has this report been sent to the heads of the schools?
It hasn't yet, Russell. No, we generally take it to the schools partnership, Attain, to discuss. So that will be happening. We're not meeting, I think, until early summer term now.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Elizabeth, and you'll expect this question from me when you hear it. On page 59, when the priority is to develop consistency of the teaching of reading, and in particular to read for fluency, I didn't see, there's nothing there, and I haven't seen it anywhere else about understanding, reading for understanding, because it is a specific area. That's one of my questions.
Yes, so we've got the reason we particularly have focused on fluency is because what we have found is that children, this is particularly an upper key stage 2, children reading for understanding, but the speed at which they read means that they are not assimilating fast enough to be able to sort of to maintain momentum in their reading. And it is also to do, if I'm absolutely frank, with the end of Key Stage 2 reading tests, which have got the standard that is expected there. They have got to get through not just the understanding, but they've got to get through a lot of reading material. So it's to address that need which we've identified. Yes, absolutely. Teaching for understanding. I think reading for understanding. It is something that I know that our advisors, our inspectors are constantly focusing on. So we always look at the phonics screening check with a wary eye, because that's about decoding and really focusing schools on, so how does that translate into reading a piece of text and understanding that? Yes.
Thank you, because children with the processing issue, they do have to read more slowly to have a level of understanding, and it is difficult, and I accept what you say, but it is an important area. My other question is on page 109, and I think your partnership working is fantastic. What's been developed, I know aspects of it have always been there, but they've been developed. Just a question really. In 2.5.8, Teach Wimbledon, which is the Alliance, do all Merton schools use that, or do some of them go elsewhere?
No, it's not all Merton schools. It is all secondary schools and some of the primary. And I think my understanding is they're actually increasing the number of primary schools that are joining up, and they're actively sort of going out to primary schools to see if they would like to join. But yes, there are other ways that our trainee teachers are supported not just through Teach Wimbledon.
I think that's perhaps because it's based from a secondary school that primaries perhaps prefer. Do you think it would be beneficial if a primary school was linked with the secondary school to work as a team to develop it?
I suspect that there are mixed views on that. I think the primary schools that are part of Teach Wimbledon hugely value it. I think there may be a view from some primaries that actually, maybe want something a bit more primary focused, but they may learn once they've joined Teach Wimbledon or find out more about it that there is a significant primary focus within it.
Very much. Can I say a huge thank you to you and everybody else for this, who was instrumental in putting the report together. I mean, Merton's education system is doing superbly well. And somewhere in there, and I can't say where it was, I read that the achievement of our most able pupils is one of the highest around. There was the number 9 in it, and I couldn't find it. I flicked through. But I think it is good to see that our most able are also being really stretched as all the work that is done for other groups, that is also happening.
Yeah, indeed. I think the reference particularly to our most able pupils is in the post-16, the A-level results. So our proportion of young people achieving A's to A stars has significantly gone up. The caveat around it is, of course, as with all schools nationally, that was on the basis of teacher assessed grades. Our schools were very, very robust in their processes in terms of internal and peer moderation. But yes, that's the trajectory, again, stretching the more able that we want to be on.
So there's so much that is really outstanding going on in our schools, and the effort of everybody in the schools and within the authority to do it. So thank you very much. But I think the points tonight made are also valid and to help become even better, one hopes. But thank you very much for everything that's going on across the whole spectrum for our children. And that's what's so important. Thank you.
Chair, can I just quickly, echo what you've said and what Councillor Henry said? I've said it before in meetings, and at risk of embarrassing them, I think we're very lucky with all our officers, but I've had cause to work with Elizabeth in a challenging situation and seen her stay very focused and to get to the end of that process. And I've seen Keith with my own eyes. I've seen Keith calm a room of people who are very tense, and I've seen him find answers in a room of people who are very worried over something. So I just wanted to, I mean, it won't be my last meeting because the Tories are going to win the election, but just on the off chance that it might be, I just wanted to say in particular, and that this is no criticism of any other officer. We're very lucky, but I've had reason to work extensively with Keith and a little bit with Elizabeth, and I think Merton is incredibly lucky to have both of them.
We all agree with you on that, and I know how highly Keith's thought of within his area, and people really respect and admire him. And I do know, I don't know if everyone knows, but Elizabeth, every day during COVID, with the new information that was bombarding local authorities from schools, I heard from schools that you went through it with a fine-tooth comb. Goodness knows what time you got up, but you sent it to school, so it was there when they arrived, and they didn't have to read pages and pages of documentation. Elizabeth had done it for them, and I know they were so grateful for that. So we are very fortunate to have you both, as well as Jane and others in the team, and it is appreciated, and people do talk about you in a positive way. Isn't that lovely? And that's nice. And it's great that other people have said it, and from both sides. Right, on to agenda item 7, which is the departmental update report. Diraj, are you there? Over to you, please.
Thank you, and thank you, members. So you will have seen the departmental update report, so I'm not going to go through all sections. There's an update around the support for vulnerable children and those with special educational needs or disabilities. We've had the school standards report, but we've also provided an update on schools admission and attendance. The significant part of the update, at the time of writing this report, we were still coming out of our inspection of local authority children's services. I'm pleased to say that inspection concluded on the 4th of March. So this was an inspection, so our inspector at Ofsted undertake an inspection. This framework was written in 2017, updated at the end of last year. And the inspection focuses mainly on the effectiveness of local authorities' children's services, and in specific to arrangements to help and protect children, experiences and progress of children in care, wherever they live. The arrangements for permanence for children were looked after, including adoption, and the experience and progress of care leavers. Ofsted also evaluate effectiveness of leaders and managers through their inspection. So members will be aware that Merton's previous ILACS inspection, we were graded good. As a result of that, we received a 2-week inspection. So starting from the end of February, the first week of the inspection required us to submit large quantities of data. This was both qualitative and quantitative, which Ofsted inspectors reviewed. And in the second week, we had a team of inspectors landed on site at the Civic, and the team constituted of senior inspectors, as well as specific regulatory inspectors who looked at our fostering and adoption arrangements, and a specific education inspector as well. And these inspectors went around, met with social care staff, met with managers and other leaders, including myself and Elizabeth and Jane. They also visited some of our young people, both in care as well as some of our inspectors, young inspectors and scrutineers. And they undertook a series of case audits as part of their work. As Jane said in the report, and Elizabeth and I would echo this, we are really proud of the Directorate, and the team worked tirelessly, and it was a great show of strength and commitment to practice. The verbal feedback we received from Ofsted was positive, and they themselves spoke to the passion and support for children and families, as well as our strong multi-agency partnership arrangements. So the next steps, as it states in the report, there is a draft report that's due to arrive, which we will have an opportunity to review for any factual inaccuracies. This will remain under embargo until publication, and I believe the publication is pushed to May. So that's the current update from us. Happy to take any questions from the room.
Diraj, thank you. Has anyone got any questions? Dennis, then James.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Looking at 2.8, do you feel as though this is a good financial outcome, or potentially a good financial outcome, so as our children get what they deserve coming out of this? It's about dedicated schools grant, and it's about one part of it's been concluded. Do you feel as though Merton has come out with a good outcome?
So as it says, we are looking at the final detail. We that remains to be seen. But you know, it is a successful outcome in terms of the negotiation. So we will be getting some money, which I think can only be helpful to ensure that the DSG deficit is brought under control. And as part of it, we remain committed that the children in the borough with special educational needs and disabilities, whether they've got EHCPs or not, continue to receive the highest support.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons I needed to check what Dennis was asking was because in case I was asking the same thing, but I partly was. So successful means we've reached the point where we know we will get some funding. Yes, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And do we know but we don't yet know what that will be. So we don't know whether, I mean, obviously it's the most serious challenge of all that we face at the moment. If that support was significantly less than we hope, there are going to be some very serious challenges. But do we have any indication as to what that support may be, or when it might come?
Apologies, James, sorry, in support.
Do we know in terms of how much money might be available to us and when we might know that?
So that's the finer detail which is being looked at, and we are. I think I'm not sure about timescales, James, to be absolutely honest, but I think it will be fairly soon.
Do we know, and you may not know the answer to this, but is it a sort of negotiation whereby we might theoretically get all we're asking for, or we might get 20% of what we're asking for, or is there a particular cap or parameter? Do we know that yet?
So what we do know is that there were a number of local authorities who were invited to become part of the safety valve programme in this second round. And actually that number of local authorities, I think, increased over the months of the negotiations. So the money available, I don't know whether there was a finite pot of money that the DFE would, but I'm presuming it had to be finite, and how they were going to then allocate.
Okay, thank you. And then I suppose the final question, or the crux of it, is that if we find ourselves with only a proportion of what we are seeking, what work is ongoing? And I've asked this for a number of months, but tonight I suppose I'm asking with a little bit more urgency because we still don't know what the situation is. But it could be, we can't talk numbers tonight because we don't know what the outcome is going to be. But it could be that a significant amount of money has to be found by us, and am I right that that has to be found within the DSG? So I appreciate this is a public meeting, so it's only fair that you answer in that context. But can you just give some picture, insofar as it's appropriate at a public meeting, as to the level of work that's taking place if we need to find a significant amount of money ourselves?
So throughout the negotiation process, and actually prior to the negotiation process, there has been activity ongoing within the local authority. So we had a DSG recovery plan, which was being implemented in the few years. I can't be precise about the number of years before, but before we were invited to become a part of the safety valve negotiations. So the actions that were part of that DSG recovery plan, and which now continue within what we might term the safety valve action plan, are looking to where we can, and appropriately, so maintaining that support as appropriate, where we can find money, or find ways to reduce that DSG spend. So it is about looking at. It is about looking at, as you will be aware, I think Jane may have mentioned this before, but what we're looking at now is bringing more young people to be able to attend local provision. So that's about expanding our local provision, a specialist provision, that is, through ARPS and special schools. It is about looking at our over-reliance on non-maintained independent special schools, and how we can manage that. And obviously by having more local maintained provision, fewer of young people would necessarily need to go into that very expensive non-maintained independent special. And there is a significant piece of work with schools to help them become even more inclusive than they are, and how they can support children more, as many children as is again sensible and appropriate with EHCPs in a mainstream setting. So action started some time ago, is ongoing, and whether we were successful or not, those are actions that we need to take.
Chair, final question. That's a really thorough list, and obviously a lot of it I'm familiar with, but and that's really good. And over time, I believe that from a layman's perspective, over the time, I believe that will work as a strategy from a layman's perspective. But are we required? We may not be, but are we not also required to pay to seek savings or to pay money back into that DSG budget, or maybe not? Maybe we're not required to do that.
James, I'm going to defer my answer because obviously I think it's probably more appropriate for Jane or Caroline to answer that, because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give you I would prefer to seek that accuracy from them.
Would it be possible for you to pass that on to them, and maybe if one of them could perhaps write to me and perhaps copy the rest of the panel, that would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on where James was leading his questions from, and I do appreciate for Elizabeth, we're actually putting you in the spot this evening, but there is a lack of transparency right now, because within the departmental update, it says negotiations have been successful. And then to be part of those negotiations, then money would be part of that negotiation for that negotiation to be successful. And when it talks about in terms of discussing the finer detail, that it's a bit more dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I'd have thought the money conversation would have probably happened by that point in time. But I do appreciate, and I don't want to put you further on the spot. I did ask Chair earlier as well, because I didn't hear in the apologies why Jane's not here this evening.
Yes, with apologies. I should have mentioned right at the beginning, Jane offers her apologies.
Okay, that's what I was just checking if things okay, that's all. Because I do appreciate, obviously she's not here this evening, you know, for the report. These things do happen. We've worked in those times recently. But there was that one point there. So I would like to see that detail, please.
Thank you. And absolutely. My understanding of the situation is that it is not the detail is not something that can come into the public domain, because the things are not yet finalised. And as soon as they are finalised, of course, this committee will have that level of detail.
Okay. Well, we can see things which aren't in the public eye as well, which is possible. You know, that is aware. And a completely separate point as well, on 2.15, it mentions that number of COVID infections are coming down in Merton schools, whereas I thought earlier this evening we talked about them going up.
It's a matter of, I think, a point in time as to when the report was written, because when we came back from half term, at that point there was that downward trajectory, and it's literally this past week and a half, 2 weeks, cases going up again. Nick?
I just wanted to come back on this, not to Elizabeth, because I think Elizabeth has answered it extremely well. But I mean, what we're actually waiting for, just want to make sure that we're all agreed on this. What we're actually waiting for is a decision from the government. It's not a decision from us. It's not something that we can now change. It's the government. I just wanted to remind myself of how long we've been waiting for that decision from the government.
Waiting to see if they clear up our mess, Nick. That's what we're
No, I didn't ask you why. I wasn't really, actually, to be fair, I wasn't actually asking you either, James. I was saying, how long have we been waiting for this decision?
We were invited to become part of the negotiations around the safety valve. I think it was July last year. But we were asked to then submit our application in December, which we did. We understand that the expansion of the safety valve programme to more local authorities actually delayed final decisions, potentially.
So it wasn't just us who was, and in fact there were more local authorities. Yeah.
Yes.
That doesn't make any better. This has been going on for years. I mean, the problem has been building up for years. So yeah, we are waiting to see to what extent the government bail us out.
I couldn't agree with you more, James. Sorry, Chair, I should be speaking through you. I couldn't agree with you more. When I first came to this authority, 28 years ago, when I first came here, you know, the norm was for children from the west of the borough with special needs to go outside the borough. And, you know, it was considered, you know, extraordinary to actually send children with special needs to schools like St Anne's. We are now in a far better position, but we've gone there. It's been a very long, arduous route through special needs with many governmental changes from both parties. As a result of it, James, we are where we are. The one question I would ask is, do we actually have excellence in our special schools? I'm going to answer it for you. Yes, we do. And I'm not ashamed of that in any way whatsoever. And that's what we've been paying for.
Well, I thought we were starting a fun joust there, as we haven't had any this evening. I was trying to work out where the attack was in that last comment. But you are right. We are where we are. The plans that the cabinet member has championed and that Elizabeth has outlined tonight, they are absolutely, from my perspective as a layperson, they seem absolutely the right plans. Nick, keep in mind that they were first mooted 12 years ago, because I was on a task group that first talked about it, and in fact a lot of that work was implemented at that time. But nevertheless, you're right, we are where we are, and I also would like the government to commit to a figure so that we can all move on. I mean, I've made as much political capital as I feel I can in the last few months, so it'd be good just to get the figure and move on now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the interesting debate about that. But I think we must remember that it's children, and we do have huge numbers of children going through assessments with different levels of SENDIS, with EHCPs, and some of them are very expensive to implement. And we were together in one school where they said they're getting children coming into school with complex needs. The more complex the needs, the more expensive it is. So we are in a dilemma. We've got to support those children. We've got to fund those children. We've got to provide for them. They are children. They are not responsible for whatever their needs are. It's our responsibility to provide for them, and it is often incredibly expensive. And so there is always, it's terrible, you have to juggle up meeting the children's needs, balancing the book. And I think we as the council are trying to do that. It's not easy, and at the moment it's, well, Elizabeth could give you all the details about it, so I'm sure Keith could also, but it is terrible with the designated schools grant, that the money, it's one pot, and what do you do? And we do hope for an answer soon. So I think we all agreed we want the very best for the children, but obviously we've got to think of the financial implications too.
Well, Chair, to be fair to you and to Nick and to others, I mean, opposition is always easy, and it's always easy to be the one throwing the grenades. It's not something I enjoy, as I say every meeting. But the flip side to that is that it's important that we as a council collectively, and the administration in particular, take responsibility for those decisions. And to be fair to the cabinet member, she has said that in a council meeting. But anyway, I mean, we've drifted into this. I mean, we are where we are. So let's drift out and move on again.
We must provide for children, but balance the books too. But it is the providing
yeah, absolutely,
children.
and then take responsibility for the consequences. The point is to do both.
Yes.
Yeah.
The cabinet member, have you want to mention?
Do you want me to come back on? Okay. Which aren't technically on here, I don't think, but I am going to insert them if that's okay. Well, I'll just take a couple of minutes to say, I mean, yeah, as I said before, who knows what will happen in May? And so what I'd like to make sure I thank everyone here for, on all sides, is the support and challenge that you've given and the commitment that you have shown to children and young people. And what I just hope for is that whatever administration we have and whoever's in the seat come May, that we maintain the focus on exactly the things that we've been talking about, making sure that most disadvantaged young people are getting into employment, making sure that our children who have special and additional educational needs are getting supported, and that we're doing that, you know, in a financially sustainable and financially sustainable way. Continuing to support our schools to make sure that they are able to shine under Ofsted, building on the work that Dheeraj has already come in and improving on in terms of our most vulnerable children, and making sure that we're protecting our children and recruiting more foster carers, which I'm sure we're about to come on to when we talk about performance and monitoring. Some of these things are more politically exciting than others, but they're all really, really important. And I've tried to do my bit to steer this. I took on the children's services during COVID, so I haven't had the kind of calm couple of years in being responsible for children's, which I'm sure otherwise would have been, because nothing ever happens in children's safeguarding. But you know, I haven't had the experience that I would have wanted. I haven't been able to go and visit as many provisions and services and foster care as I would have wanted. But that is what we are all here for, is to make sure that our children are safe, to make sure that all of our children are well educated, and to make sure that they go on to future lives. So thank you for the support and challenge that you've given me. They would continue to be my priorities if I'm here in May.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying I sincerely hope you are. People recognise quality from any particular party. Sorry? Recognise your talents, James. I don't.
Anybody watching this would be convinced that the cabinet member and I both think we're going to lose in May. So it'd be interesting to see if we'll both be back in May. But Chair, I do want to say that if the cabinet member was not to return in May, the reason for that would be something that is extremely rare in politics anywhere now, almost unheard of in the national scene, which is an act of genuine political courage on more than one occasion of doing the right thing. And if the cabinet member were not to be sitting here in May, the reason would be because of that political courage. So I've done it before and I want to do it again. I just really want to pay tribute to her for the work she's done for the young people in the borough, the passion that she's shown during her time as cabinet member. And just so I don't get a text from my group whip later, I'll end by saying Councillor Ormerod will have a tough act to follow in May. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. I always like a bit of wit with it. If we can move on to item 8, performance managing report. Carl, please.
Thank you, Chair. In time-honoured fashion, I present the performance overview dashboard and a cover note outlining the highlights from the dashboard. I'm pleased to say that on the exception, there are 3 indicators that I'm reporting on exception this time compared to the 6 last month. So this is the average weeks taken to complete care proceeding, indicator 16. The number of in-house foster carers recruited, indicator 22, and the indicator 30, reception year surplus places. If I may, Chair, and I'm sure the eagle-eyed amongst you have already spotted this, there is a slight discrepancy in the numbers reported on the dashboard and the commentary in relation to indicator 30. The correct figure is indeed the 12.1% quoted in the commentary in the cover report, and not the 10.1% quoted in the dashboard. I apologise for that, but it doesn't make a material difference to what we are saying, which is that we are outside of the range of between 5 and 10% of surplus places. And in other words, we have a surplus of places at reception year. I will, there's also, as ever in the report, some amendments and corrections, which I refer to as in relation to indicator 21 in particular. We have underreported the percentage of our children in care in foster placements to date, and I provide the correct amended figures, and it is a very positive picture. I will leave it there and open it up for any questions and comments. And Chair, if I may, at the end of this item, I'd like to just make a personal announcement, if I could.
Well, Carl, thank you very much for the report. Russell, you have a question.
Right. Thank you for this report, Carl. I received 5 copies of it, so I thought I'd better read it and make a comment on it, because obviously people wanted me to say something. The first one was the one that's in red. I know that 26 weeks is not our fault necessarily. Can something, I mean, it's my last meeting, so it won't make any, I won't know whether it is done or not. Can something be said about how long it takes to do the other things that aren't in the council's control? I mean, I know you've said it in your commentary, but can you highlight that? There's also a few others that I would have found very interesting to know the answers to. Whether they're relevant or not is, you can make that decision. I would want to add into the report, to the numbers, the percentage of children educated outside the borough, particularly special needs. And I mean, that's an issue that's coming up at the moment anyway. And also the number of children who are homeschooled, state educated academies and free schools. That may help with decision making later on. And thank you very much for the reports of the past few years. That's my comment.
Thank you. So there was a question about indicator 16. Dheeraj, I was wondering whether you could come in. I think it was about whether we can say more about some of the things that are sort of outside of our sphere of influence and what we're doing about it, I think, Dheeraj.
Yeah, thank you. So I think with last month's report, there was a bit more detail provided for members of the panel. So the 26-week timescale for court proceedings effectively is the time it takes from the moment we put in an application where we believe we require an order for a child, and for the court and the judge to finally make the decision. As the report states, there are a range of influences and range of factors that have an impact. Most recently, and in discussions with our colleagues in court, what's apparent and what this indicator also picks up on is the percentage or the number of weeks per quarter. So at any one stage, in the most recent quarter, for instance, how long did it take for the cases to conclude? Some of these cases are legacy cases, and some of the work started in the middle of the pandemic. So we are going to continue to see some small numbers of children and some small numbers of cases that are going through the court proceedings where final evidence is yet to surface. And that's as a result of both the court's availability, but also the availability of external experts. Some of these experts are experts we have asked for, but a lot of them are also where other parties have asked for. So those are some of the challenges. One of the ways we are mitigating and working to mitigate against this is a monthly tracker meeting. So that's where council's officers review all the information on our care proceedings cases and our PLO cases to review and consider what, if any, additional actions are required, and which of those assessments and expert assessments could be influenced in many different ways. These meetings, and there's also a tracker meeting where we meet with the Court Advisory Service, CAFCAS, and in those meetings we review and consider again jointly with them some of the detail behind the evidence being, everyone's waiting for, I guess. So those are some of the actions we are taking, and I have said this in the previous meeting as well. Merton's numbers of children being presented to court are low, so we some of the preventative work that we've been undertaking and the council's been undertaking over the last several months has shown an improvement in terms of the numbers of children being brought into care. So this will it's expected that the performance in this area will improve in time, though we're conscious that there are still some where proceedings started during the pandemic where we're still waiting for those matters to conclude. I hope that that's answered the question that was raised.
Thank you. I think, Russell, do you want Carl to speak first or do you want to come in?
I'd like to come back on what was said just then. If we go back to the beginning of the meeting when Councillor Pearce asked a question about numbers rather than percentages, it's the same thing because it's a small number. Therefore, the percentage is going to be very high if one court proceeding takes 70 weeks and all the rest take 24 weeks, then that's so good to put us over the number that we want to be at. To see the figures would be easier because, as Dennis said, 1 is 1% of 10 of 100, and it's 10% of 10. So, I mean, we get the same problem at school when you talk about figures because one child at my school is 2% of this class, which is a bit ridiculous, but that's the way it works. So that's just a comment from me.
And I'm sure we can, as we did for the last meeting, look to provide the absolute numbers behind it because it's a valid point. And possibly we are doing ourselves a disfavour here because, as you say, one figure can skew it, and actually, you know, it shows something that we could be maybe a bit more nuanced about. I know that Councillor Makin also raised a question about additional indicators in the dashboard. Elizabeth, I mean, I guess under the new administration, that could be something that could be looked at, I guess.
I believe it was discussed last time as an opportunity in terms of a new administration and thinking about scrutiny panels afterwards. There is the opportunity to look at those indicators again.
And on the two specific suggestions, certainly the home educated, that is certainly something that we have. I would have to look into the what we could provide around number or percentage of children educated outside of the borough. That would need a bit of analysis, but certainly on that second suggestion around home educated children, that is something that we could quite easily provide if that was what this committee was after.
I think it's been raised that numbers, perhaps as well as percentages, actual numbers would certainly help clarify a situation and help prevent a misskew of the information. Are there any more questions, please? Right, Carl, thank you very much for this. And you wanted to make an announcement.
If I may, so in the context of the uncertainty that we've heard, there is one thing that is sadly certain is this is my last scrutiny overview meeting. I have accepted a new role in another London borough. So if I may, Chair, maybe a slightly extracurricular stats for this committee. I've been in Merton for 34 months. I've worked for 2 chief execs, 2 leaders, 2 lead members, 3 DCSs and 5 assistant directors. We've had 16 scrutiny meetings, which works out about every 8 weeks, and 6 of which were remote, which is a percentage of 37.5%. But maybe joking aside, and on a more serious note, I wanted to also put on record just how impressed about the conscientiousness, the respect and diligence that this committee has brought to bear in conducting its important business. And I sincerely hope that I was able to contribute to those conversations and enable that scrutiny to happen to the best of this committee's ability. And I really want to express my gratitude to all members for their work to improve the lives of young people. I think you do an amazing job, and it's been an absolute privilege to work and serve you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Carl, I can remember you coming and asking, yes, I think probably we all can, 34 months ago, pre-COVID. And thank you very much for all your contribution during this time. It's been very much appreciated, and your response to our questions. We're very sorry to be losing you, but it's your choice to move on with your career. And I'm sure everyone joins me with wishing you the very best of a happy and successful time in your next role. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
We would stay down the pub, but people get a bit tired now. The last item really is, has anyone got any topic suggestions they'd like Stella to make a note of for the future after the next election when we come back? If there's anything people would particularly like addressed to be brought up. Ellie?
Less topic suggestion and more a kind of frustration on my part that we haven't been able to talk about immunisations. This is a health responsibility, but it's something that obviously has, we care about deeply. And I remember when I was a backbencher, having the health colleagues here and us looking at the numbers and challenging them on the data, and there's lots more work that needs to be done. We're expecting it to come to this meeting. As I understand, there's been some issues with staff leaves and absence, but I really think we need to make sure that that is looked at again as soon as possible, because the childhood immunisations are absolutely critical.
Stella, isn't it due to come to the next meeting? Yes. So it's a hiccup this time. And I think due to circumstances, because there's still people having to isolate, but it is due to come to the next one. I take your point completely, that it is very important that we keep. But has anyone got any suggestions? Dennis? Beg your pardon.
I'd just like to make a suggestion that most schools have monetary problems, and the reason they've got monetary problems is they have a lot of agency staff employed because of sickness, particularly in COVID times. I know at Hazelmere, for example, we've had a lot of staff off. We've got 7 staff on long-term sick leave, and we've got a budget of, we've spent more than our budget on agency staff too. So if the council could look at setting up an organisation whereby you've got floating teachers in some ways that float around different schools, perhaps you do it with the clusters, I don't know. I mean, it needs talking about, I think. I would like to put that on the...
Russell, I would agree with you. When I first started teaching, Merton had its own bank of teachers, and I am very against the teaching agencies that supply cover teachers, because they take a percentage, and quite a few ex-teachers have gone into it. It's quite a profitable business. And I don't know if Merton could ever consider going back to running their own bank of supply teachers, where perhaps the costs weren't so high, but then schools would still have to pay for them. It is difficult, and I know schools are working with teaching assistants being based in a class, taking over the running because the planning would be done. But it doesn't always happen. I don't know if Elizabeth, if that could be ever considered in the future.
I think that it's something to take away and consider. I think probably what I would say is that over the past few years, whilst I've been in Merton, there have been a couple of agencies, they're still called agencies, but they have attempted to really drive down the overhead costs. So there was an agency called Air Supply, which was really looking at a much more streamlined way of booking supply teachers, and the overhead overhead costs that schools had to pay were significantly less. So schools have looked into those sorts of things, but the suggestion is an interesting one in terms of whether that might be possible. And obviously there is good partnership working between schools in Merton. So what they might be able to do across clusters, it would be something interesting to consider.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, I liked your idea and Councillor Makin's idea. I think to look at having our own internal resource would be fantastic if it was possible, because I think a lot of schools have the same challenge. The one I was going to suggest is if it was possible for the next council to complete that work which we made a start to on technology in classrooms. And the reason I think it's so important is because in the past, it hasn't been possible because it's so expensive, but a lot of that technology has now been made available because of COVID times. So I think there's a really good opportunity, and there's lots of research from around the world, particularly Maine in the US, have successfully introduced personal technology, and it would mean a lot of work and different learning patterns, but it has been proven that it can improve learning outcomes. The point that the cabinet member made on immunisations. So there was also a task group on that, Stella. I can't remember what it was, but I think you led that, or you were the officer leading that, and that was a national one, wasn't it? That was shared as good practice nationwide. And Chair, for a short time in Merton, immunisations actually improved off the back of some of those things being implemented. So maybe again, that through you, Chair, that maybe that report can also be looked at and just make sure that everything in there was implemented. Thank you.
With some of the reports, we do ask if they then come back to see if the impacts continued. But when we have whoever's here in June, when the meeting happens, perhaps that's one of the challenges to present to the group who present the immunisation report. Thank you. Are there any other suggestions from anyone? Well, thank you, everybody. I'd like to say a huge thank you. It's nice when there's an occasional little spat. It makes it a bit interesting. But I think I said in my last council speech that I really think some of the questions from everybody are really thoughtful, penetrating, demanding, and all of us are striving in our own and different ways for what we want is the best for our children in their education in Merton. And I think that's excellent. And different point of views are vital for us to move forward. So I'm glad we don't always just rubber stamp, and that we do challenge and we do ask. And it's interesting, it's educational for us. And I think it's all in the best interest of our children. So I'd like to thank all the members of this committee very much for coming. I'd like to thank all the officers who've presented the reports to us and answer our questions in such detail. And I'd particularly like to thank Stella for all your minuting, note-taking and following up on everything and collating these meetings for us. Thank you very much. So thank you. It would be strange without some of you who are standing down, and I wish those two a very nice next stage of their life. And Carl, you in your new post. And I'll say good night to you all. Have a safe journey and see some of you, I hope, in June.